So, like, imagine spending 20 years climbing a ladder, right? Putting in all those agonizing
Oh,
hours,
yeah, all the sacrifice.
right? Making the sacrifices,
Mhm.
finally getting that corner office. You get the budget, the undeniable title on your door.
The dream.
Exactly. And then someone tells you that to actually change the world, you have to intentionally burn that ladder to the ground.
Wow.
Yeah. That the very structure you use to measure your worth is like the exact thing bottlenecking your ultimate impact.
I mean, that is just a terrifying, ego-shattering premise.
It really is. And well, that is exactly the blueprint we are unpacking today on this deep dive.
It really is a complete dismantling of our baseline corporate and organizational psychology,
Oh, absolutely.
because we are conditioned from birth to seek visibility.
Mm-hmm.
We crave
We want
categorization.
the labels.
Exactly. We feel safe when we can attach a definitive noun to what we do and who we are. Director, lead pastor,
Yeah.
regional manager.
The titles.
Right. But the framework we're looking at essentially argues that those nouns are, well, they're dangerous illusions.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are looking at a text called Unstoppable Mission, Unleashing Leaders to Reshape the Global Landscape by Chris R. Velazquez.
Great book.
It is. But here's the critical distinction for today's deep dive. We are not staying in the clouds.
Right. No high-level stuff.
Exactly. We are not doing a high-level summary of the theology or the inspirational philosophy of the book. We are exclusively analyzing the back-end machinery.
The engine room.
Yes, the engine room. We are looking squarely at the appendices, the discussion questions, the brutal reflective exercises, the practical applications, and those actionable to-do lists.
Which is really where any theory either survives contact with reality or, just dies on the whiteboard.
Totally.
Because you can have a beautiful, soaring philosophy of leadership, but if you don't have the systems to actually capture it, stress test it, and multiply it across different cultures.
You just have a nice idea.
Exactly. You don't have a movement. And what Velazquez provides in these source materials is a rigorous, almost clinical operating system for moving from mere activity to actual sustainable multiplication.
And specifically, moving from a dependence on your own sheer willpower and charisma to relying on what the text calls spirit-led systems.
That's a huge shift.
It really is. So, to ground us in this, we have a really striking visual anchor provided in our source materials today.
Oh, love this image.
Yeah, it's powerful. So imagine a photograph, a breathtaking, extreme bottom-up perspective of a grove of towering redwood and sequoia trees.
Just massive trees.
Right. The camera's placed right on the forest floor, pointing straight up. And the angle emphasizes these massive, sprawling, gnarled roots gripping the earth with, like, intense violence.
It's a very grounded perspective.
Yeah, and the ground itself is absolutely covered in a thick blanket of fallen, bright orange and yellow autumn leaves.
Beautiful, but also a bit chaotic.
Exactly. And as your eye travels up past the roots, these colossal ancient trunks converge high, high up in the sky, disappearing into the mist of the canopy.
What's fascinating here is how perfectly that specific image encapsulates the entire thesis of the appendices we are about to analyze.
How so?
Well, when most people look at a redwood, they look at the trunk, they look at the height, the
Oh,
canopy.
that's the impressive part.
Exactly. In ministry or in global leadership, that canopy is the visibility. It's the multiplication. It's the global impact everyone wants to talk about.
The stuff that gets you on magazine covers.
You nailed it.
Yeah.
But biologically, those massive trunks are completely impossible without the unseen, widespread root systems gripping the rock beneath the soil.
Unseen being the key word there.
Yes. In this text, those roots represent the hidden, unglamorous work, character formation, deep contextual strategy, and the mechanics of reproducibility.
And we definitely cannot ignore those fallen leaves covering the ground in the photograph.
Exactly. The seasons of endurance, of testing, of shedding, and honestly, of profound suffering.
Which nobody wants to talk about.
No, but the redwood only survives for hundreds of years because it inherently knows how to endure the changing seasons. It sheds what is dead to protect the core organism.
That makes a lot of sense.
So this entire deep dive is about how to build that unseen root system and how to survive the shedding seasons so that the canopy can actually multiply rather than just grow tall and, snap in the wind.
So let's start digging into those roots. The first major hurdle the text forces you to confront is an absolute identity shift.
A painful one.
Very. It draws heavily on the practical exercises from Chapter 1, from Minister to Missionary Catalyst, and Chapter 2, Apostolic Theology of Mission.
Right.
The text hits you immediately with a deeply provocative question. How would your understanding of your calling change if your title and your position were removed from the equation entirely?
It is a completely disarming question, specifically because it attacks the neurochemistry of leadership.
Yeah, really mess with your head.
The author is asking you to fundamentally separate your assignment from your identity. To force this, the text provides a highly specific exercise called the Call Fruit Confirmation Matrix.
Okay, break that down for us.
It demands that you map out your entire leadership history in 3 distinct, ruthless columns. Column 1 is your key ministry experiences, like what you actually did.
Okay, pretty standard.
Right. But column 2 is your observable fruit. And the text is highly specific here. Observable fruit is not your effort, it is not your intention, and it is definitely not your busyness.
So not just running around going to meetings.
Exactly. It is actual measurable transformation or disciples made.
Wow, that is a high bar.
It is. And then column 3 is external confirmation from discerning leaders or mentors who have no financial or emotional stake in your success.
I want to focus on that separation of assignment and identity for a second, because the psychology of that is fascinating.
It's the core of the whole thing.
Let me offer an analogy to see if I'm tracking the mechanism here. It feels to me a bit like taking the badge off a police officer.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, so if you strip away the uniform, the badge, the cruiser, and the institutional authority, does that person still possess the instinct to enforce justice, protect the vulnerable, and step into chaos?
Right, internally.
Exactly. Or were they just wearing a uniform, cashing a check, and following a script provided by the precinct?
That is a phenomenal way to isolate the core issue. Because if the calling disappears the moment the badge is taken away, the brutal truth is that it was never a calling.
It's just a job.
It was just a job description. It was a role you were playing. Velocys is forcing leaders to confront a terrifying reality.
Which is?
A massive percentage of people mistake holding a position for possessing a calling. The first reflective exercise in the appendix literally asks you to list all the titles, responsibilities, and platforms you hold right now.
I bet that list gets long for some people.
It's very long. And next to each one, you have to brutally assess, does this reflect a position I was hired for, a temporary assignment I was given, or a deep, confirmed calling?
Which is hard to admit.
Extremely hard. Which of these specific tasks would you still wake up and do if your title was deleted from the organizational chart tomorrow?
Okay, but I am going to push back on this anti-title sentiment.
Fair enough.
Functionally speaking, isn't a title incredibly helpful? A title tells a team who is actually in charge. It helps with structural organization.
Sure.
It sets expectations for stakeholders. It provides legal and operational safety. Why does this text insist on practically burning the organizational chart to find the true calling? Is there a danger in being so radically anti-institutional?
Well, the text isn't arguing that titles are inherently evil or operationally useless. It's arguing that they are seductive and ultimately acts as a narcotic.
A narcotic.
Yes. They offer artificial validation.
Correct.
The danger is that a title allows you to hide a lack of fruit behind a wall of positional authority.
Oh, that stinks.
The text warns extensively against letting local success, or a comfortable title, become a substitute for global obedience. To break this addiction, the author introduces a framework called the Mission Alignment Audit. You are instructed to list all your current priorities, meetings, and daily tasks.
Okay, I'm with you.
And you rigorously sort them into 3 buckets: local maintenance, low kingdom impact, and global impact.
Ouch. Labeling 50% of your calendar as low kingdom impact is quite a pill to swallow for a type A leader.
But it forces an honesty that most organizational structures actively discourage. We often fill our days with local maintenance because it provides immediate dopamine.
Checking off the boxes.
Exactly. We manage the existing systems, we respond to emails, we put out relational fires, we keep the peace, we fulfill the visible duties of the title. We look incredibly dizzy.
We look productive.
Right, but the text asks the structural question. Does your current activity reflect a massive global mission, or just your personal preference for feeling needed locally?
Wow.
If you strip away the title, you are no longer defined by how well you maintain the local machinery. You are forced to measure your life by whether you are participating in something unstoppable.
Think about that for a second. If you are listening to this right now, whether you run a nonprofit, lead a ministry, or manage a corporate team.
Yeah, apply this to yourself.
I want you to mentally audit your own week. What are you doing right now purely out of obligation to maintain the perception of your title rather than out of a genuine, deep-seated calling?
It's a tough question.
It really is. If your board of directors or your congregation stripped you of your official role tomorrow and cut your salary to zero, which of your passions and daily tasks would actually remain?
Very few for a lot of people.
What would you do for free simply because your internal wiring dictates that you cannot help but do it?
We have to acknowledge that transition, realizing that your core calling exists entirely independently of your compensation or your positional authority.
Right.
That transition is incredibly destabilizing. When you lose the title, you lose the external validation metric, you lose
Lose the prestige.
you lose the automatic respect in a room, which means, structurally, you suddenly have to rely on something entirely internal to keep you moving forward.
Which perfectly bridges us to the reality of what happens when that internal structure is tested. Because to survive the kind of identity stripped down we are talking about, you need profound internal stability.
Absolutely.
The roots have to grip the rock, not just the loose topsoil. Let's look at the crucible of character, pressure, and endurance.
So the materials draw this heavily from appendix exercises related to Chapter 3, Character and Confirmation for Apostolic Service, and Chapter 11, Testing Endurance.
Okay.
And Valisis makes a massive countercultural pivot here. In modern leadership literature, we usually treat character as a baseline requirement, a pass-fail metric.
Yeah, like don't lie, don't steal.
Exactly. Don't embezzle money, don't scream at your staff, be a generally nice person. But this text treats character and the capacity for endurance not as a baseline, but as the actual qualification and engine for a global mission.
There is an exercise in Appendix 3 called the Leadership Integrity Stress Test, and honestly, it is intense.
Oh, it really is.
It doesn't ask you vague moral questions about whether you are a good person. It asks you to simulate a catastrophic high-pressure scenario.
Like a real disaster.
Right. A sudden 50% loss of funding, a massive public team conflict, a moral failure of a close colleague, and document your exact historical responses in past microcrises across 3 categories.
Yeah, those categories are key.
Your emotional response, your decision-making pattern, and your spiritual dependence.
What's brilliant about that diagnostic is how it bypasses your idealized view of yourself. When pressure rises, the text asks a penetrating question.
What's that?
What is the very first thing that collapses in your life? Think about the mechanism of stress. Is it your peace that collapses first?
Oh, I've seen that happen.
Do you become highly anxious, manic, and start micromanaging everyone around you? Is it your discipline? Do your healthy habits, your reading, your diet, your boundaries just evaporate the second the budget is threatened?
Guilt is charged right there.
Or is it your relational confidence? Do you isolate yourself? Or, most critically for this text, is it your theology?
Wow, theology collapsing.
Yeah. Do you suddenly stop believing that God is sovereign the exact moment your primary donor pulls their funding?
Wow. What collapses first? That is a diagnostic question every leader should have written in dry erase marker on their bathroom mirror.
It really exposes us.
It does, because we all have a collapse sequence. For me, it's definitely discipline. The moment the pressure hits a certain PSI, my calendar goes out the window, and I revert to pure reactive firefighting.
It's natural. It's human.
So if we know our collapse sequence, how do we actually build the operational system to prevent it?
Well, the author provides a highly mechanical framework called the Resilience Architecture Plan. Notice the word architecture.
Yeah, it implies building something solid.
Exactly. It demands that you move away from reactive solutions.
Right.
Like taking a 2-week vacation only after your adrenal system has completely burned out.
Right, which is too late.
Way too late. Instead, you build preemptive, load-bearing systems. You are instructed to map out your spiritual disciplines, your emotional health practices, your trusted advisory board, and your rest rhythms before the crisis hits.
You build it in the calm.
Yes, you architect the building to withstand a magnitude 8 earthquake while the ground is still perfectly still.
It also pairs this architecture with an incredible concept in Appendix 4 called the mental bandwidth audit.
This one is so practical.
It really is.
Yeah.
Now, the common metaphor for mental overload is having a browser with 100 tabs open. But let's look at it more viscerally.
Okay, I like visceral.
Imagine you are at a crowded networking event, and you are holding a massive tray filled to the brim with glasses of water.
It's so stressful already.
Right.
Doug.
As you walk through the crowd, you are spending 90% of your cognitive energy just trying to balance a tray so you don't spill water on anyone.
You're not even looking at people.
Exactly. You aren't actually looking at where you are going. You are completely consumed by the act of carrying. That is what undefined mental bandwidth does to a leader.
That is exactly the cognitive load theory the text is addressing. The mental bandwidth audit forces you to put the tray down.
Just put it down.
Yes. You have to capture all these recurring, undefined thoughts that are draining your battery. Thoughts about your calling, your unresolved strategy, your interpersonal fears.
Just get them out.
You list them all out on paper, and then you are forced to process every single item through a strict triage system. Action, delegation, or release.
Only those three options.
Only those three. If you cannot act on it immediately, and you cannot delegate it to a specific person with a deadline, you must intentionally and completely release it.
So it's easier said than done.
It is. But you literally cannot afford the metabolic and mental tax of carrying undefined anxiety when you are trying to reshape a global landscape.
And this ties directly back to our visual anchor of the redwood trees. Remember those fallen autumn leaves covering the roots?
Yes, the shedding.
The text offers a radical theological and psychological reframing of those seasons of shedding. There is an exercise called the endurance timeline, where you are required to map out the most difficult, painful seasons of your life on a chronological graph.
The failures, the public embarrassments,
Yeah.
the betrayals by close friends, the doors that were slammed in your face.
Yes, all of it. And instead of viewing those as wasted time or attacks on your progress, the text asks a different question. What if suffering is not a disruption to your calling, but the primary mechanism through which your calling is actually confirmed?
That flips the whole script.
It really does. What specific kind of leader was forged in you through that exact pressure? The fallen leaves in that photograph aren't a sign that the redwood tree is dying.
No, they're essential.
They are biological evidence that the tree knows how to survive winter. The shedding provides necessary nutrients back into the soil, feeding the root system for the next massive growth spurt.
Exactly. And that is
Yeah.
a profoundly different way to view a setback. You are building systems proactively so that when the winter comes, and it will always come, you don't panic.
You're ready for it.
You don't abandon the mission. You just naturally shed what isn't necessary. You protect the core, and you let the dead leaves feed the roots.
So let's say you survive the crucible. Your character is intact, your roots are deep, you've survived the shedding season.
You're doing great.
Right. You step onto a plane, you fly to a new country, or even just a new demographic in your own city, and suddenly nobody cares about your deep character because you are constantly accidentally offending everyone in the room.
A classic missionary mistake.
Curiously, how does the text bridge that gap? Because maintaining internal effectiveness is entirely different from maintaining external effectiveness when you drop yourself into a foreign context.
The source material is remarkably blunt about this exact failure point. It pulls from the appendices related to Chapter 4, cross-cultural competency, and Chapter 8, field immersion. It asks a devastating question. What if misunderstanding culture is not a minor ministry weakness that you can ignore, but a primary structural barrier to gospel fruitfulness?
Wow, a structural barrier.
Yes. We have a terrible habit of mistaking our cultural familiarity for spiritual effectiveness.
Oh, that's a good line. Mistaking familiarity for effectiveness.
Right. We assume that because a leadership strategy or a communication style works perfectly in our home city, it must be the universal orthodox way to do things everywhere.
The text provides a fascinating exercise to break this arrogance called the Cultural Intelligence Field Lab.
This is a great exercise.
It really is. It challenges the reader to engage a culture or subculture entirely different from their own and do one thing. Simply observe.
Don't speak.
Right? Do not teach. Do not cast vision. Do not try to lead. Observe the unspoken communication patterns. Observe what they actually value versus what they say they value.
There's always a gap there.
Always. Observe the power dynamics in the room. Who speaks first? Who never speaks?
And that rigorous observation leads to the ultimate tension the book highlights, the incredibly dangerous tightrope walk between contextualization and compromise.
That's a tricky line to walk.
It is. The exercise literally has you draw 2 columns on a piece of paper. Column A, what adapts based on the culture? Column B, what remains absolutely unchanged regardless of the culture?
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, because defining the line between contextualization and compromise is notoriously difficult.
People fight over this all the time.
Constantly. It reminds me of the mechanics of traveling internationally with a high-end laptop.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Your laptop is your ultimate tool. It houses the operating system, all the data, the core message, the power. But if you fly to London or Tokyo and try to jam your standard American power plug straight into the wall socket, best case scenario, it just doesn't fit.
Right. It's just physically impossible.
You get zero power and you are useless. Worst case scenario, you force it in, the voltage is completely wrong, and you start an electrical fire.
Right. You completely blow the fuse, and now neither the laptop nor the building has power.
Exactly. The power source, the theological truth, the core message of the gospel, that does not change. But if you don't use the right adapter, which represents contextualization, you will never connect the power to the people.
You're just a dead battery.
You won't empower them.
But, and here is the line of compromise. If you try to open up the laptop itself and rewire the actual motherboard to run on a different frequency just to fit the wall, you've compromised the machine.
You've ruined the tool.
You've lost the essence of what makes it work. The adapter changes the delivery mechanism. It never changes the core data.
That analogy perfectly isolates the mechanics of the issue. Contextualization is the adapter. Syncretism or compromise is rewiring the motherboard.
Right.
And the text actually uses a brilliant historical case study for exactly this kind of adapter work. The reflective exercise points you directly to the Apostle Paul in Acts chapter 17 during his time in Athens.
Oh, at the Areopagus. Yes. The prompt doesn't ask you to look at his theology. It asks you to observe his methodology. How did he engage, listen, and speak completely differently to the Greek Stoic philosophers at the Areopagus than he did to a Jewish audience in a synagogue?
It was a completely different approach.
He didn't change his core message, the laptop remained identical, but he fundamentally swapped out his adapter.
He literally quoted their own pagan poets to them. He walked their streets, he read their monuments, he found the altar to the unknown God, and he used their own cultural artifacts as the entry point for the gospel.
Yes. He built his strategy entirely from ground-level observation, not from inherited assumption. And to help leaders replicate this, the text provides an incredibly practical tool called the assumption check.
How does that work?
You're required to write down 5 deeply held assumptions you have about the people or the specific field you want to serve, and then you rigorously scientifically test them. Which of these assumptions actually came from your own unbiased ground-level observation?
Probably not many.
Exactly. And which came from your own fears, your cultural habits, or the inherited thinking of your sending organization?
It is a deeply humbling exercise because if we are honest, most of our grand organizational strategies are born on whiteboards in air-conditioned conference rooms.
Not on the streets.
Not in the dirt of the streets we are trying to serve. The text follows this up with another exercise called the Immersion Intelligence Report.
That sounds like spy stuff.
It kind of is.
Right.
It demands that you meticulously document the actual needs, the hidden opportunities, and the systemic barriers of a place before you are allowed to try to fix a single thing.
Before you speak.
Yes, it explicitly commands the leader, do not try to solve anything yet. First, you must learn to see.
If we connect the mechanism of this to the bigger picture, how often do we violate this basic principle in our everyday professional lives?
Oh, all the time.
Think about the listener right now. How often do you walk into a new corporate meeting or take over a new project team and your ego immediately starts trying to fix problems before you have spent even a week simply learning to see the unique environment?
We want to prove our worth immediately.
Exactly. We bring our unexamined assumptions, we enforce our inherited thinking, and when the local team naturally resists us, we blame them for being stubborn or incompetent, rather than realizing we're trying to jam an American plug into a European socket.
Exactly. We are starting relational fires everywhere we go because we refuse to observe. So let's track the progression here.
Okay, let's review.
You've stripped your identity from your title. You've stress-tested your character to survive the crucible. You've learned to adapt culturally without compromising the motherboard. Now we hit the operational tipping point of the entire book.
Fulcrum.
Yes, because the goal of Velazquez's framework isn't just to make you a highly effective, culturally aware, resilient solo leader. The goal is exponential, global growth. You've observed the culture, you've adapted, now you need to grow the movement. But the text argues that to do this, you have to build something that fundamentally does not need you.
This brings us to the core engine of the appendices, sourced from the chapters on movement strategy, and indigenous leadership development.
Okay.
And the central question here is an absolute punch to the gut for any visionary. If your discipleship or organizational model cannot reproduce itself without your direct involvement, what exactly are you multiplying?
Let me be completely honest. When I read the reflective exercises for these chapters, I actually felt offended.
I'm not surprised.
The text bluntly asks, have you built a ministry that depends on your presence, or one that can continue without you? And it introduces this metric called the reproducibility test.
The acid test.
Right. It states that if someone else, a normal, everyday person, cannot repeat your system without your direct oversight, your system is not just flawed, it is fundamentally broken.
It demands that you look at your entire operational workflow and sort every single task into two strict categories: reproducible systems and leader-dependent activities.
And what's the goal?
The goal is to systematically eliminate the latter.
But wait, I have to push back on this, not just from a practical standpoint, but from a psychological one.
Go for it.
Doesn't every single human being inherently want to feel indispensable? Isn't that the core driver of ambition?
It absolutely is.
We build these complex, bespoke systems, we make ourselves the linchpin of the operation, and we get a massive secret ego boost when things start to fall apart if we take a one-week vacation.
Because it proves they need us.
Exactly. It proves to the board that we matter. Isn't it terrifying to intentionally build an architecture that is specifically designed to make you irrelevant?
Of course it is terrifying. It is an active assault on our core desire for significance and job security. But the text is absolutely ruthless about this reality. It argues that true apostolic maturity, the highest level of leadership success, is not measured by how many people follow you. It is measured exclusively by how many local leaders you empower to lead others.
Wow.
If your model requires your unique charisma, your specific theological intelligence, or your constant hovering micromanagement to function, you haven't built a reproducible movement. You've just built a very fragile audience.
So how do you practically dismantle your own indispensability without causing organizational chaos?
The author provides a highly controversial tool for this called the 90-day multiplication sprint.
90 days.
Yes, it is a highly compressed, aggressive timeline designed to force simplicity and reproducibility. Here is the framework. Month 1, you start one group, one initiative, or one project.
Okay, simple.
Month 2, you identify potential leaders from within that exact group, people who have been there for barely 30 days.
That's fast.
Month 3, you force the multiplication, you divide the group into 2 or 3 new groups, and you put those brand new leaders entirely in charge.
Okay, I have to stop you there. A 90-day sprint. Handing over control of a global mission or a spiritual community to a 3-month-old convert or a novice leader.
That's the plan.
That doesn't just sound ambitious, it sounds structurally negligent. How does Velazquez justify this massive risk without the entire movement collapsing into heresy, bad management, or total administrative chaos?
It sounds negligent to us because we are deeply conditioned to view leadership as risk mitigation rather than empowerment.
That's true.
We think training means intellectual accumulation. But the text argues that if you give yourself 3 years to train someone before letting them lead, you will inevitably overcomplicate the system.
Because you have the time to make it complicated.
Exactly. You will build a system that requires a master's degree in theology or an MBA to run. The 90-day sprint is an artificial constraint.
It forces your hand.
It forces you to simplify your core system, your theology, and your operations until they become so basic and so clear that they can be safely reproduced by ordinary people in a matter of weeks. The risk of messy multiplication is always better than the safety of sterile stagnation.
And to practically manage that rapid handoff, the text gives us the leadership transfer matrix. You identify emerging leaders and you have to map their readiness.
Right.
But it's the sequence of the book mandates that is so crucial. Instruction, then coaching, then delegation.
That specific sequence is the antidote to the chaos you were just worried about. Instruction is highly directive. I do it, you watch me do it, and you take notes.
Classic shadowing.
Right. Coaching shifts the dynamic. You do it, I watch you, and we debrief afterwards so I can guide you.
So they're taking the wheel, but you're in the passenger seat.
Exactly. Delegation is the final release. You do it, you own the results, and I completely step away.
Stepping out of the car entirely.
Yes. Most leadership failures happen because we skip the middle step. We jump straight from instruction to delegation. We verbally tell someone what to do. We walk away. The person inevitably fails because they lack guided practice, and the visionary leader throws their hands up and says, "See!" Nobody can do it like me. I have to do everything myself.
Yes, or the exact opposite happens. They get perpetually stuck in the coaching phase forever.
Micromanagers.
Just constantly hovering, tweaking, and micromanaging the new leader, never actually letting them feel the weight of true authority. To break that specific habit, the text issues a brutal exercise called the Authority Release Challenge.
Another painful one.
It literally commands you to look at your calendar this week, identify one significant area of your mission or project that you are controlling unnecessarily, and completely release it, not just the busy work tasks.
No. Hand over the actual authority. Allow them to make real decisions, and more importantly, allow them to make mistakes without you swooping in to save the day, because the principle is absolute. If a system requires your direct control to continue functioning, it must be redesigned. You're a bottleneck masquerading as a catalyst.
It's a massive ego death. But here is the reality check. You cannot delegate authority, and you certainly cannot multiply a movement in 90 days if your strategy is a 40-page ambiguous manifesto.
Nobody can follow that.
If you can't clearly articulate the exact vision to the people you are handing it to, the handoff will fail. If the vision is just a vague, inspirational feeling in your head, no one else can run with it.
Right.
Which leads us perfectly into the next major hurdle. Ecosystems of clarity. We're talking about support networks, strategy articulation, and the reality of teams.
This section pulls heavily from the structural exercises in 3 distinct areas. Chapter 7 on prayer and financial support, Chapter 9 on strategy presentation, and Chapter 10 on team-based ministry.
Okay, got it.
The underlying unifying theme across all these appendices is that passion is never a substitute for clarity.
The first thing the text attacks here is how we build our support base. It introduces an exercise called partnership ecosystem design.
Yes.
You have to literally map out your intercessors, the people actively praying for you, your financial partners, and your strategic advisory board. And you have to rigorously evaluate. Is your current support system transactional, or is it truly relational?
That is a critical operational distinction. Transactional partnership means you only communicate with these people when you need a check, when you need a favor, or when you are in a massive crisis.
You treat them like ATMs.
Exactly. You treat them like ATMs.
Yeah.
Relational partnership means you are treating your supporters as active, equal participants in the mission. You are sharing the failures and the strategic pivots, not just the glossy newsletter victories.
But the real gauntlet in this section, and honestly my favorite exercise in the entire text, is the vision clarity drill.
Oh man, this one is tough.
It is agonizing. You have to be able to pitch your entire complex mission strategy in 3 distinct, perfectly polished formats. A 1-minute elevator summary, a 5-minute detailed pitch, and a full, comprehensive strategic presentation.
And anyone who has done this knows that the 1-minute summary is always the hardest.
Yeah.
Because it forces you to kill your darlings.
You can't fit the fluff.
You cannot hide behind academic jargon, you cannot rely on emotional storytelling, and you cannot ramble. If you cannot explain the exact core mechanism of your global strategy in 60 seconds, your strategy is too blurry to be reproduced by anyone else.
The text asks a brilliant diagnostic question to help refine this. I want you to imagine sitting in a boardroom right now. The text says, if you had to stand up and defend your mission strategy before hostile elders, brilliant mentors, and the actual people you hope to reach, what specific part of your plan would still feel unformed?
That phrase, what would still feel unformed, is so incredibly exposing because we all know exactly what it is.
We all have one.
We all have that one specific slide in our pitch deck, or that one paragraph in our project plan that we just sort of talk really fast over, hoping nobody in the room is smart enough to ask a follow-up question.
You don't ask about slide 4.
Exactly. The text is saying, find that exact weak spot, do not hide it, expose it, and let the accountability of your team stress test it until it solidifies. A strategy is not credible just because it is emotionally inspiring. It must be structurally sound enough to withstand scrutiny.
And who is doing that intense scrutiny? Your team.
Which brings up the team alignment dashboard exercise.
Right.
You are asked to assess the varying roles on your team. Who carries the spiritual weight, the relational glue, the administrative execution, the strategic foresight, and the pastoral care? But the text has a deeply counterintuitive take on team dynamics here.
It really does.
In modern corporate culture, we usually think a healthy team is a team that never argues. Total alignment. Harmony is the ultimate goal. But Velocis violently rejects that. The text asks, what if the strength of a mission team is revealed not in its artificial harmony, but in how it faithfully handles intense structural conflict.
Yes. It views conflict not as a failure of leadership, but as a theological and operational necessity. And this brings me right back to the image of our redwood trees.
I was hoping we'd come back to the roots.
When you actually study the biology of a grove of redwoods, it's mind-blowing. These trees can be 300 feet tall, but their roots don't actually grow incredibly deep. They only go down about 6 to 12 feet into the soil.
That doesn't seem like enough for a 300-foot tree.
It doesn't. But they grow outward, sometimes over 100 feet from the base of the trunk, and they physically intertwine, overlap, and fuse with the roots of all the other redwoods around them.
Which is exactly how a tree that massive survives a 100-mile-per-hour windstorm with such shallow roots.
Exactly. A single, isolated redwood would blow over in the first major gale. But because their roots are locked in this tangled, messy, friction-filled embrace beneath the surface, they literally hold each other up.
They share the load.
The friction of the team, the intense push and pull of the visionary arguing aggressively with the administrator about the budget, the pastoral heart clashing with the cold logic of the strategic mind, that exact tension is what anchors the mission against the wind. If you artificially avoid conflict to keep the peace, you are isolating your roots. When the storm hits, you will blow over.
This raises an urgent question for anyone listening today. Think about your own executive teams, your own ministry staffs, your own project boards.
Be honest with yourself here.
Are you demanding a shallow, polite harmony that avoids asking the hard, necessary questions? Or are you actively engaging in the kind of faithful, respectful conflict that actually fuses the roots together and stress tests your strategy?
Because if you don't have that friction,
If your one-minute pitch falls apart the moment the administrator on your team challenges the timeline, your vision is absolutely not ready for the real world.
So let's look at the full architecture we've built. We have the deep roots of character. We have the cultural adapter. We have the 90-day reproducibility engine. We have the clarified, stress-tested strategy held together by a tangled team.
We've built a lot.
Now we have to actually execute the work on a Tuesday morning. We move to our final major area of the deep dive, the action flow. Execution and future-proofing.
This is where the rubber meets the road.
This is where we synthesize Appendix 4, which is the master actionable to-do list exercises, and Chapter 12, commissioned and sent.
Because all of this high-level philosophy is entirely useless until it hits a calendar. Appendix 4 introduces what it calls the apostolic action flow.
Okay, break that down.
It is a 5-part, relentless operating system that underpins every single concept in the book. It's a continuous cycle. Capture, clarify, organize, review, execute.
On the surface, that sounds identical to a secular corporate productivity system like getting things done.
It absolutely mirrors high-level execution frameworks. But what makes it unique is how it applies those cold mechanics to spiritual calling and movement dynamics.
How so?
First, you capture. You must externalize every single calling, every random idea, and every new responsibility. You get it out of your head and onto paper, so it stops draining your mental bandwidth.
Putting the tray of water down.
Exactly. Then you clarify. You rigorously define what each captured item truly means. Is this new idea an actually confirmed calling, or just an unverified distraction masking as an opportunity?
That's a huge distinction.
Third, you organize. You structure these clarified items into actionable, contextual categories. Fourth, you review. You regularly step back and refine your alignment. Are these actions actually advancing the global mission, or have I drifted back into local maintenance?
And then the final step.
And finally, you execute. You act decisively without hesitation because the thinking has already been done.
That review mechanism is where 99% of us fail. We make the brilliant list, we organize the list into beautiful color-coded software, and then we never look at the macro-level list again until we feel completely overwhelmed 6 months later.
It just becomes a graveyard of good intentions.
The text demands a continuous practice, reflect, refine loop. Action alone isn't enough. Mindless action is just exhaustion. Action has to be measurable and reflective.
And crucially, that action has to be tested against the future, not just the present. The text introduces a brilliant closing exercise called scenario-based mission testing.
I love this one.
It asks you to literally sit down with your team and run war game simulations. What is your exact operational framework if you experience a sudden 70% loss of funding next month?
A real possibility.
What is your step-by-step protocol if there is a massive moral failure on the executive team? What happens if the political climate shifts and you face severe legal cultural resistance?
You can't just hope that doesn't happen.
You do not wait for the crisis to invent the protocol. You build the contingency framework today.
It's essentially conducting fire drills for your life's work. The book calls this entire process future-proofing apostolic strategy. You have to look at the horizon, identify emerging realities like massive cultural shifts, technological disruptions, generational leadership transitions, and ask one question.
How structurally vulnerable is my current model to these changes?
Exactly.
And the ultimate goal of that future-proofing is to ensure your movement hits three non-negotiable criteria. It must be simple, so it's easy for anyone to reproduce. It must be flexible, so it's instantly adaptable to changing cultural contexts without breaking the motherboard.
Right.
And it must be sustainable, meaning the entire architecture is entirely independent of any one single visionary leader.
To summarize the ultimate progression the author is demanding across all these intense appendices, it's a beautifully simple but incredibly violent pathway for the ego.
Violent is the right word.
Your initial calling must be refined into absolute clarity, which eventually leads to true commissioning. And your daily activity must be disciplined into an actual strategy, which must ultimately result in self-sustaining multiplication.
Because if your life's work stops at activity, you are just a busy person with a full calendar. If it stops at strategy, you're just a smart person with a good idea.
Wow.
Only when your work reaches autonomous multiplication are you actually fulfilling an unstoppable mission.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today. We have covered an immense, challenging amount of ground. We started by aggressively stripping away the safety of our titles, asking who we truly are when the badge and the salary are removed.
The identity shift.
We dove into the crucible of character, realizing that the shedding seasons, the agonizing pressure, the failures, those are not the end of the road. They are the very things that confirm we are ready to lead.
We examine the absolute necessity of cultural intelligence, learning how to observe first and using the right adapter so we don't blow the fuses when we try to communicate truth in a new environment.
Right, contextualization over compromise.
We confronted the ego-shattering need to release our grip on control, to stop trying to be the indispensable hero and start building simple 90-day systems that explicitly do not need our constant presence.
The 90-day sprint.
We clarified our strategies until they can survive a brutal one-minute pitch and the necessary tangled friction of a healthy team. And finally, we mapped out a relentless action flow to capture, clarify, and execute these convictions against an unknown future.
And as we close, the expert and I want to remind you that this entire blueprint we've analyzed today is about building something that will outlive you. It's what Villasis calls apostolic architecture.
It's bigger than you.
We go back one last time to that striking image of the massive, enduring redwoods. The goal of your leadership is not to be the tallest, most visible tree for a fleeting, glorious moment. The goal is to build a root system so deep, so completely intertwined with the leaders around you, that a forest stands for centuries after your name is entirely forgotten.
The author leaves us with a profound, diagnostic final reflection in the text. If God asked for your life's work to be measured not by your visibility, but by your multiplication, what exactly would he find?
To take that a step further, to leave you with one final thought to mull over today as you look at your own calendar and your own ambitions. If the true, lasting evidence of your success is only what remains in others after you move on, what if the greatest legacy you will ever leave isn't something you built with your own two hands, but the space you intentionally stepped out of so someone else could finally lead?
Step out of the way.
What is one specific system you can implement this week that will still be producing fruit 5 years from now, long after you've handed over the keys? Start there. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.